This is a Mac Mini, this is a mini PC. This runs macOS, this doesn't, but it can, sorta, kinda, using QEMU. I want to talk about this little guy because this is pretty interesting. As a Mac guy, I have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to PC offerings. I've been aware that mini PCs have existed for a long time, but I've never used one or held one or even seen one in person. When Gecom reached out and asked if I'd like to make a video about one of their products, I was ready to decline the offer. But then I realized a lot of Mac users are like me and haven't seen how small high-end PCs have gotten. Today, I'll be looking at a Geekom XT12 Pro. Full disclosure, Gecom provided me this review unit. I'm not being paid for this review, and I'm not going to be receiving any commissions. I want this to be my own words, so buy it or don't. I just think this thing is interesting. As a Mac guy, I usually don't get design envy from PCs, as I find gaming PCs to be a bit garish. But this product actually does it for me. There's quite a bit more sophisticated styling than I'm used to seeing on a PC. And in your hands, this feels like a quality product. This is definitely not cheap plastic crap. First, let's get the obligatory tech specs out of the way. This is a Core i9 12900H, meaning it's a 12th gen Intel CPU. This isn't the most recent generation, but we'll come back to why this isn't the biggest deal. This is a 14-core CPU, 6 performance cores, and 8 efficiency cores, and it comes standard with 32 GB of DDR4 and a 1TB Gen 4 SSD. Despite its diminutive size, it has a fair amount of connectivity, 2 USB 4.0 ports, which means Thunderbolt, 3 USB 3.2 Gen 2, and 1 USB 2.0 port for some reason. Moving on, 2 HDMI ports, a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, headphone jack, Wi-Fi 6E, Bluetooth 2.5, and of course an Intel Iris Xz, or Z, I'm not sure how you say it, integrated graphics chipset. Being a PC, it is upgradable to 64 gigabytes of RAM, and it should support DDR5. The SSD can be swapped out and even has a smaller unoccupied M2 slot that is the 2242 size, and it can be used for a secondary SSD. This is quite a bit of computer in such a small form factor. Here, let's put this into perspective. This computer has more CPU horsepower than my Mac Pro 2019 with its 8-core CPU. You're probably thinking right now, well, no shit, that's 8 cores versus 14 cores, but this little 45-watt CPU is faster than the 16-core Mac Pro 2019. To continue pretending to know what you're thinking is probably, well, those are Intel Macs. And yes, that's true, but it's also roughly neck and neck with the M3. Okay, what about price? It's $699, which isn't cheap, but there is a decent amount of value here. This is one of those products that has me turning my head. The Mac Mini starts at $600, but comes with 1/4 of the RAM and 1/4 of the storage. The weakest link in the Gecom is the GPU. The Iris is serviceable, but it's not a gaming PC. For an absurd demo, I decided to install Red Dead Redemption 2, and the results were predictably not good. I'm going to skip out on benchmarking a bunch of individual games because it's just not a gaming PC. On screen are the 3D marked scores, and it's just okay. If you're like me, these numbers don't mean very much. To give you an idea of what kind of GPU this has, it is roughly that of a GeForce GTX 760 or a Radeon RX 460. Those are budget GPUs from about 7 to 10 years ago. This is by far the weakest link of this computer. Although in the Geekbench 6 OpenCL benchmarks, it's pretty close to the M1. Granted, OpenCL is not the end-all be-all, especially on the Mac. No one buying a PC in this form factor should be expecting a hardcore gaming PC. The Gecom comes pre-installed with Windows 11 Pro, but it's just not my preferred operating system. This computer is the first time I've spent any time with Windows 11, but this isn't a Windows 11 review. It is funny though that Windows 11's market share has been declining compared to Windows 10. Normally I'd chalk this up to people hating change, but I imagine stuffing the operating system with ads has soured them on Windows 11. I'm sure a good chunk of my viewers have already gone through the process of setting up Windows 11, but this is my first time, and first impressions do matter. Windows 11 setup is pretty annoying, as Microsoft sees this as an opportunity to try and upsell you its many products. No, I do not want Microsoft 365, and no, I do not want PC Game Pass. Windows 11 feels like a regression, which is a shame because this hardware is pretty great, so I decided to buy a 2242 SSD and install Ubuntu. Gecom lists this port is only supporting SATA, but I bought 2 SSDs to try, one NVMe and one SATA to see if there's an off chance that they might have mislisted this port. I learned the hard way that indeed it can only accept a SATA drive. The documentation lists up to another terabyte, but I'm pretty sure if you buy a 2 terabyte drive, even though they're kind of expensive, that it would indeed work. I used my Mac Pro to put Ubuntu on a thumb drive so I could install it on my XT12 Pro. Cracking open the Gecom doesn't take a lot of time and it's pretty elegant. It drives home what the Mac Mini could be. Once Ubuntu was installed, I decided to do something pretty silly, which is run macOS through Ubuntu using QEMU. This is really not the way to experience macOS because I do not have any graphics acceleration. You can pass through AMD graphics acceleration if you happen to have the hardware, which I do not. If you haven't used QEMU, it's an open source virtualizer and emulator. All I did was Google QEMU and macOS and ended up on this tutorial. This is boring, so I'll give you my quickest summary. I did this part, and then this part, and then that part, but I skipped this part, and then I went down to here and did this part, and that was pretty much it. Basically, to pull this off, all you need to be is somewhat terminal savvy. If there's enough interest, I can make a full-blown tutorial how I did this in Ubuntu. To be silly, I ran Geekbench 6 on it. In single-core performance, it's roughly that of an iMac Pro, but in multi-core, it's more like a MacBook Pro 2015. With graphics acceleration, this would actually be usable, and I did zero tweaking to try and get more performance out of QEMU. I couldn't think of anything else clever to do with an OS that doesn't have graphics acceleration. You can surf the web, but it kinda sucks. According to the tutorial I followed, it is possible to get beyond native performance using QEMU, but that requires a lot of know-how, time, and also money for things like a pass-through GPU. Most of the time the XT12 Pro is fairly quiet until it's under load, and then you can hear its fan rev up. This is a Intel computer after all. The 12900H, as I mentioned, is 2 generations old, but the 13900H is only about 8% faster, and the GPUs are exactly the same. As far as I know, in the current generation, the 14th gen, Intel has only made a 14900HX, which has a much slower GPU and draws a lot more power, thus runs a lot hotter. Gecom does make a model with the 13th gen processor, but I'm not sure if I would pay the extra money for it. The 12900H is really the sweet spot. This computer is an ideal addition to my setup as it's an x86 platform machine that's fast and doesn't get in the way. As a Linux box, this is pretty tough to beat. Another feature that I haven't mentioned yet is it comes with a VESA mount, which makes it ready for stealth builds and would make for a killer media PC. Although this is one of the rare PCs that looks cool enough that maybe you don't want to hide it. You'll certainly see this little guy pop up in future videos when I need to use Windows and don't want to reboot my Mac Pro. I'd absolutely love to get my hands on a Thunderbolt case and make a hidden gaming PC with this guy. Again, I have to thank Gecom for providing me this hardware as it's just really cool. Would I recommend this over a Mac Mini? It really depends on your use case. As a Mac guy, if I had to choose one, I'd choose a Mac Mini, but the value here is hard to deny. However, if you're in the market for a PC to complement your Mac like me, this is a compelling option, and Gecom does offer some more price-conscious computers. This computer fit my unique use case, and I could see it fitting many other people's too.